Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my friend and colleague, Congressman Allred, for his leadership in the fight to protect the fundamental right to vote and to save our ailing democracy. It has been an honor working with him, with Congresswoman Terry Sewell, and with Congressman John Sarbanes over the past year on both the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. As you just heard, we are living through the worst assault on the right to vote since the Jim Crow era. And yesterday, on the Senate floor, white nationalists used the Jim Crow filibuster to block voting rights legislation. But they did not win the contest for the soul of our nation. I rise to affirm that we, the people, aren't giving up that easy. We never give up. We, the people, didn't give up when, after we finally ended the scourge of slavery in this nation, white nationalists fought back, violently unraveling Reconstruction, throwing duly elected black people out of office, and barring black voters from the voting booth for generations. We responded by organizing. Progress came in fits. It took us nearly a century, but progress came. It came in the courtroom, where Thurgood Marshall helped to end a century of legalized segregation. It came on the streets, where the March on Washington and the Montgomery bus boycott produced meaningful social change. And of course, it came in Congress, where, after considerable pressure from the civil rights movement, this chamber and the Senate passed the Voting Rights Act into law, and they overcame a filibuster to do it. Imagine that. Mr. Speaker, like you, I was hoping against all hope that today's story would end the same way, with a majority of senators doing the right thing. To those of you watching at home, to the millions of you who put it all on the line to save our democracy, to see the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act become law, I feel your pain right now. But I do not despair. As Sherilyn Ifill, the Director Counsel of the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, said recently, no story in the history of our quest for racial justice has ever ended with the words, "and then they gave up." Our story, the story of building a true multiracial democracy in the 21st century, is no exception. The fact is, progress is not always linear. It is messy. There are false starts. There are setbacks, like what happened last night. But the weight of history and the force of reason are on our side. I grew up in the Baptist church. To quote from the book of Jeremiah, like a fire shut up in my bones, I know that goodness will prevail. As the elders used to say, trouble don't last always. Weeping may endureth for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Look at how far we have come already. Just a few years ago, democracy reform was a pipe dream, embraced only by the most committed activists. But thanks to an overwhelming groundswell of energy, of movement building, of organizing, the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act passed the House, and it came just 2 votes short of passing the Senate. We are not going anywhere. We are more energized than ever to see this through. We must pick up Senate seats this fall to make the filibuster an impossibility. This is the fight of our lives, for our climate, for health care, our jobs, our dignity under the law, our future. We have no choice but to keep going. I am reminded of the words of Dr. King in his 1966 speech in Kingtree, South Carolina. Let us march on ballot boxes, for this is the way we're going to straighten up the nation. Let us march on ballot boxes until somehow we will be able to develop that day when men will have food and material necessities for their bodies, freedom and dignity for their spirits, and education and culture for their minds. Let us march on ballot boxes so that men and women will no longer walk the streets in search of jobs that do not exist. Let us march on ballot boxes until empty stomachs are filled. Let us march on ballot boxes until the idle industries of Appalachia are revitalized. Let us march on ballot boxes until brotherhood is more than a meaningless word at the end of a prayer, but rather the first order of business of every legislature's slate or agenda. Let us march on ballot boxes. Dr. King's words are as true today as they were nearly 60 years ago. But while our work must include the ballot box, we know that it also must go beyond it. We must envision the world as we want it, and we must do everything in our power to bring about that world. Hold your elected officials accountable. Educate your friends, your family, your neighbors. Change their hearts and minds. Mr. Speaker, unlike John Lewis and his generation, we are not called to risk our lives. We are merely called to exercise the rights that they helped us to win, our votes and our voices. Like those before us, let us march on. Mr. Speaker, as we grieve the demise of democracy legislation in the Senate last night, I rise in grief and in gratitude to honor my beloved teacher, the legendary Lani Guinier, who passed away earlier this month. Lani Guinier's life defies summary. She began her career in the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice. She led voting rights advocacy at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, often driving alone at night through hostile places, like from Selma to Mobile, Alabama, to win 31 of the 32 cases she argued. Due to her intellect and her sterling record of accomplishment, she was nominated to lead the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice. She would go on to become the first woman of color tenured at Harvard Law School. But like many great civil rights leaders, Lani Guinier did not define herself by the power she held or the acclaim she received. She defined herself by the power she unleashed within her clients, her students, and the American people. Lani Guinier found her voice by helping others find theirs. I am blessed that she helped me find my voice. So the day after the Senate tried to silence the voices of the American people, it feels fitting to honor her by speaking from the floor of the People's House. I first met Professor Guinier when I was in college. I was taking a writing course, and with her characteristic generosity, she agreed to let me interview her. At the time, I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer, like my friend, Colin Allred. That warm evening, the sun still glowing in the sky, she illuminated a different path forward for me. She revealed to me that civil rights advocacy was about so much more than litigation, as important as that is. It was also about leveraging the power of impacted communities to transform entire institutions. Without meaning to, she helped persuade me to become a legislator. When I arrived at law school, Professor Guinier taught me more than I could ever have expected. Not just everything I know about voting rights law, but also how to become the person I hope to be. As the first woman of color to be tenured at Harvard Law School, Professor Guinier showed us that being a first is not a privilege, but a responsibility. A lesson that is not lost on me as one of the first openly gay black members of Congress. Her scholarship sought to show that every voice belonged in our constitutional conversation. Not just John Marshall, but Thurgood Marshall. Not just lawyers like Constance Baker Motley, but activists like Fannie Lou Hamer. Not just the people whose names make the history books, but the seemingly ordinary people living lives of extraordinary service. While most law professors obsess over jurisprudence, what judges do, say, and think, Professor Guinier opened our eyes to demos prudence, the law that emerges from and enhances the power of the people. She knew that she knew that justice is not the work of justices alone. At heart, Professor Guinier was a democratic idealist, a prophetic voice who called us to reconstruct our democratic institutions and reimagine our democratic identities. She cautioned us that winner-take-all elections risk converting political competition into mutually assured destruction, intensifying conflict and underrepresenting those already underrepresented. She helped Congress reinvigorate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, work the Supreme Court subverted last year in Brnovich v. DNC, and which I was proud to help restore by introducing the Inclusive Elections Act, which we passed in the House, but unfortunately the Senate rejected last night through the filibuster. After the court demolished the Voting Rights Act's foundation in Shelby v. Holder in 2013, she urged Congress to not only repair the damage, as we did in the House, but as was blocked last night by the Jim Crow filibuster, but she also encouraged us to guarantee an affirmative right to vote. I have been honored to answer that call by introducing the Right to Vote Act, which also passed the House last week as part of the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act. Beyond prescribing specific reforms and remedies, Professor Guinier urged us to see that democracy was not a zero-sum war over the power to dominate, but rather a delicate project of sharing power with one another as equals. A democracy, she said, is not something we inherit. It is not something that we inhabit. It is not something that we consume. It is something that we actively build together. Just as the Senate refused to heed the will of the people last night, the powerful did not always heed Professor Guinier. But she knew the power of dissent. Whether dissenters speak from the bench, from the lectern, like this one, or from the streets, what seems like their weakness is really their strength. The powerful coerce us to do their bidding, but dissenters call us forward to freely do what is right. I am heartbroken by Professor Guinier's passing. I miss her. But Professor Guinier, even now, you show me that accepting myself as I am can help me to center the people that I serve. You inspire me to protect and perfect our multiracial democracy. I once asked you how to advance that mission. In today's times, you said, I think that's the question for your generation. With our democracy on the line, may we, the people, lift every voice to answer. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.